The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Plaza Hotel's ballroom sparkled like stars, each light catching on the designer dresses and custom suits of Silicon Valley's elite. Among them stood James Chen, the 32-year-old founder of SecureFlow Technologies, worth an estimated $400 million. But tonight his thoughts weren't on stock prices or upcoming mergers. They were on the diamond ring in his pocket, and the woman who'd been wearing it for the past 6 months, Sarah Mitchell. 10 years ago, James had been coding in a cramped studio apartment, surviving on instant noodles and determination. His parents still ran their small Chinese restaurant in Oakland, working 14-hour days just as they had throughout his childhood. He remembered helping them after school, doing homework in the kitchen between serving customers, the constant worry about making rent hanging over their heads. Those memories kept him grounded even now, as he moved through the upper echelons of tech society. Sarah moved through the crowd at their engagement party with natural grace, her emerald green dress a perfect complement to her auburn hair. The daughter of a banking executive, she'd grown up in a world James had only dreamed of during his childhood: private schools, summer homes in the Hamptons, winter breaks in Aspen. Yet from the moment they'd met at a Silicon Valley coffee shop 2 years ago, she'd shown nothing but genuine warmth and humility. Sarah's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She appeared at his side, slipping her arm through his. "Dad's telling everyone about the wedding plans. 6 months seems like forever to wait, doesn't it?" He smiled down at her, taking in the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she was excited. The wedding would be at the Ritz-Carlton in Half Moon Bay, her mother's choice. 300 guests, a 10-piece orchestra, Michelin-starred catering. Sometimes it all felt surreal, like he was playing a part in someone else's life. Forever, he agreed, but his attention had drifted to a group of Sarah's family friends nearby. They were watching the couple with barely concealed interest, whispering behind their champagne glasses. He'd seen those looks before, the subtle assessment, the unspoken question of whether he truly belonged in their world, despite his bank account. Sarah squeezed his arm, oblivious to his discomfort. "I can't wait to be Mrs. Chen," she said softly, and he felt his heart swell. In moments like these, the rest of the world fell away, and he could almost forget the vast differences in their backgrounds. Almost. As the evening wore on, James couldn't shake the feeling that he was still that boy from the restaurant kitchen, trying to prove he deserved his place in this glittering world. The question that had been nagging at him for months grew louder: did Sarah truly see him for who he was, or was he just another success story in her privileged world? The answer, he decided, would determine everything. Here's the 1,500-word rising action section. "Can you believe she's actually marrying him?" The whispered words caught James's attention as he stood near the bar, partially hidden by a massive floral arrangement. "I mean, yes, he's rich now, but you can still see the rough edges. Not quite our circle, is he?" The speaker was Catherine Wells, one of Sarah's mother's oldest friends. James felt his chest tighten as another voice joined in. "Sarah's always had a soft spot for charity cases. Remember that rescue dog she insisted on bringing to Cotillion?" A burst of muffled laughter followed, and James took a long sip of his whiskey, letting the familiar burn distract him from the old insecurities bubbling to the surface. He'd proved himself 1,000 times over in the business world, built his company from nothing into a cybersecurity giant, and yet here he was, still feeling like an imposter in their world. The conversation played on repeat in his mind during the drive home to his penthouse apartment. He thought back to his first meeting with Sarah 2 years ago, at that coffee shop in Palo Alto. He'd been sleep-deprived, wearing his one decent suit, rushing between investor meetings. She'd been in line ahead of him, wearing ballet flats and a simple sundress, her hair messy from the wind. When the barista called out that her card had been declined, she'd laughed and started digging through her purse for cash. "Let me get it," he'd offered, surprising himself with his boldness. "Oh no, I couldn't," she'd protested, but he'd already handed over his card. "Consider it karma. Someone did the same for me once, back when I was surviving on ramen and dreams." That had made her smile, and somehow they'd ended up sharing a table. She'd told him she was working at a non-profit focused on educational access, having rejected her father's offers to fast-track her into investment banking. He'd found himself opening up about his parents' restaurant, about coding until sunrise, about his vision for democratizing cybersecurity. "You know what I love about technology," she'd said, leaning forward with genuine interest. It's one of the few truly meritocratic spaces left. It doesn't matter where you came from, if you have the skills and the drive, you can make it. Those words had stuck with him, becoming one of the many reasons he fell in love with her. But now, in the wake of the engagement party whispers, doubt crept in. Did she really believe that, or was he just a fascinating deviation from her usual social circle? Over the next few weeks, James watched Sarah throw herself into wedding preparations with characteristic enthusiasm. She insisted on personally handling the seating arrangements, making sure his parents would be comfortable, and that some of their old restaurant regulars, who'd supported them through tough times, had places of honor. "Your mum mentioned she's nervous about the dancing," Sarah told him one evening as they reviewed vendor contracts. "So I've arranged for us all to take family dance lessons together. Dad's terrible at it too, so they can bond over having two left feet." Her thoughtfulness made his planned test feel even more wrong, but he couldn't shake the need to know for sure. The idea had come to him late one night. He would wear his old suit to the wedding, the same one from their first meeting. If Sarah truly loved him for who he was, the suit wouldn't matter. As the wedding date approached, Sarah's genuine character continued to shine through in countless small ways. She spent hours helping his mother pick out a dress that made her feel beautiful while respecting her conservative tastes. She learned to make dumplings in the restaurant kitchen, laughing at her own clumsy attempts and beaming with pride when she finally got one right. "You know what I love most about your family," she said one night after dinner with his parents. "The way you all take care of each other. The way your dad still gives free meals to struggling students, even though money's tight. The way your mum remembers everyone's names and stories. That's real wealth." Every such moment made James question his plan, but then something would happen: a raised eyebrow from Sarah's mother when he used the wrong fork, a subtle grimace from her father when he mentioned his parents' restaurant. The way certain friends suddenly needed to refresh their drinks when he approached, and his resolve would harden again. The weekend before the wedding, during the rehearsal dinner, James watched Sarah navigate both worlds with effortless grace. She moved seamlessly between helping his grandmother feel comfortable, despite the language barrier, and chatting with her father's banking partners about market trends. She seemed equally at ease in both spheres, while he still felt like an outsider looking in. That night, Sarah called him, breaking their agreement to spend the week before the wedding apart. "I just wanted to hear your voice," she said softly. "I keep thinking about how lucky I am to have found you." James gripped his phone tighter, staring at the old suit hanging in his closet. "Are you sure about that?" he asked, his voice rough. "About being lucky?" "Absolutely. You're the most genuine person I know, James. In a world full of people pretending to be something they're not, you're always exactly who you are." The irony of her words hit him hard as he bid her goodnight. In less than 48 hours, he would put that certainty to the test. As he lay in bed, he imagined the various ways she might react: disappointment, anger, shame. The possibility that had both terrified and compelled him to this point was that she might finally reveal her true feelings about their class differences. The day before the wedding, his mother called. "Son," she said in Mandarin, "I saw the suit you left at the restaurant for pressing. Are you sure about this?" "I need to know, Mum," he replied. She was quiet for a long moment. "The girl loves you. Anyone can see that. But you've always been your own worst critic, just like your father." As the sun set on his last night as a single man, James stood at his penthouse window, looking out over the city. Somewhere out there, Sarah was probably doing last-minute preparations, unaware that her perfect wedding was about to be derailed by her fiancé's insecurities. His phone buzzed with a text from her: "Can't wait to be your wife tomorrow. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me." James closed his eyes, his throat tight. By this time tomorrow, he'd either have destroyed the best thing in his life or proven his fears groundless. Either way, nothing would ever be the same. Here's the 2,000-word climax section. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear over Half Moon Bay, sunlight dancing across the Pacific waves visible from the Ritz-Carlton's cliff-top ceremony site. White roses and orchids transformed the already stunning venue into something out of a fairy tale, with crystalline chairs arranged in perfect rows and an elegant white arch framing the ocean view. A string quartet practiced softly in the corner as the first guests began to arrive, their designer outfits and jewelry catching the morning light. In his preparation room, James stood before the mirror, methodically buttoning up the old suit. The polyester blend fabric felt rough against his skin, a far cry from the bespoke suits he'd grown accustomed to. The pants were slightly too short now, the jacket tight across his shoulders, and the tie, the same cheap blue tie he'd worn to countless interviews, was frayed at the edges. He looked like a different person, like the hungry young man who'd walked into investor meetings with nothing but dreams and determination. His best man, Michael, burst into the room and stopped dead in his tracks. "James, what the hell? This isn't your wedding suit. The Savile Row one is still in its garment bag. We have to get you changed, we're already running late." "This is what I'm wearing," James said quietly, straightening the crooked tie. Michael's face shifted from confusion to understanding. "This is about what happened at the engagement party, isn't it? Look, man, those people are snobs. Sarah isn't like them. You know that." "Do I?" James turned to face his friend. "Everyone has a breaking point, Michael. A moment when reality doesn't match their expectations. I need to know if Sarah's marrying me, the real me, or the successful version she thinks I've become." "This is insane," Michael protested. "You're going to humiliate her in front of everyone she knows." The words hit James like a physical blow, but he steeled himself. "If she truly loves me, what I'm wearing won't matter." Outside, the crowd had swelled to 300 of Silicon Valley's most influential figures, along with both families' closest friends. James could see Sarah's mother's face turn from anticipation to horror as he walked down the aisle. Her father's jaw clenched tight, his knuckles white around the wedding program. Catherine Wells was practically gleeful as she leaned over to whisper to her seatmate, no doubt feeling vindicated in her previous judgments. His own parents sat in the front row, his mother's eyes filling with tears, whether from happiness or disappointment, he couldn't tell. His father's face remained impassive, but James recognized the slight furrow in his brow that appeared whenever he was worried about his son. The whispers grew like waves against the shore. "Is that from Target? Did he lose everything overnight? I heard tech stocks were down, but this is ridiculous. Poor Sarah, imagine the photos." Then the wedding march began, and everything else faded away as Sarah appeared at the end of the aisle. She was breathtaking in her custom Vera Wang gown, her face glowing with happiness behind her veil. James watched her expression carefully as she drew closer, waiting for the moment she'd notice his inappropriate attire. Her step faltered slightly as she reached the altar, her eyes widening as she took in his appearance. The officiant began to speak, but Sarah raised her hand, stopping him. The crowd held its collective breath, and James felt his heart stop. This was it, the moment of truth. "James," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the hushed gathering, "that's the suit you were wearing when we first met, isn't it? At that coffee shop in Palo Alto." The question caught him off guard. He'd expected shock, embarrassment, perhaps even anger, but recognition. Understanding? He managed a small nod. Sarah's face broke into a radiant smile, tears shining in her eyes. "I recognized it immediately because I still have the dress I was wearing that day too." In fact, she reached down and lifted the hem of her wedding gown slightly, revealing a pair of scuffed ballet flats. "These are the same shoes I was wearing then. I was going to surprise you with them during our first dance, a reminder of where our story began." The murmurs from the crowd shifted from scandalized to touched as Sarah reached out and straightened his crooked tie with tender fingers. "I fell in love with the man who was so nervous about spilling his coffee that he barely spoke 2 words to me," she said softly. "The man who worked 18-hour days but still found time to help my little brother with his college applications. The man who still sends his parents' restaurant's delivery drivers home with gas money on cold nights." Her voice grew stronger, and she turned to address the crowd directly. "Some of you might be wondering why the man worth hundreds of millions is wearing an old suit to his wedding. Well, let me tell you about the man I'm actually marrying. He's someone who grew up watching his parents work their fingers to the bone to give him an education. Someone who ate instant noodles for a year straight while coding his first program. Someone who, even after all his success, still keeps a jar of coins in his office to give to the homeless people he passes on his way to work." She turned back to James, whose eyes were now wet with tears of his own. "And do you want to know something else? A week ago, I went to your parents' restaurant not for dinner, but to learn how to make your favorite dishes. Your mother spent hours teaching me how to fold dumplings just right, telling me stories about little James helping in the kitchen, doing homework between serving customers. She showed me the corner where you used to study, the marks on the wall where they measured your height every year. Sarah's voice cracked with emotion. I wanted to learn because that restaurant isn't just a place, it's the foundation of who you are. It's where you learn the value of hard work, the importance of family, the meaning of sacrifice. And I love every part of that story, James Chen. Every struggle, every victory, every scar and callus. And yes, every outdated suit. She took his hands in hers, her touch gentle but firm. I don't care what suit you're wearing, because I'm not marrying your clothes or your bank account or your social status. I'm marrying your heart, the same heart that made you stop and help a stranger with a declined credit card. The same heart that still works as hard now as it did when you had nothing. The same heart that I fall in love with more deeply every single day. The silence in the venue was absolute. James could feel hundreds of eyes on them, but for the first time since he'd conceived this test, he didn't care what anyone else thought. All he could see was Sarah. All he could feel was the love radiating from her words and touch. Those shoes, he managed to say, his voice rough with emotion. You kept them all this time? Sarah laughed through her tears. Of course I did. They're my lucky shoes, they led me to you. She squeezed his hands. And this dress? I had the seamstress sew a small piece of fabric from your mum's old apron into the hem. She gave it to me when I told her I wanted to carry a piece of your family's journey with me down the aisle. In that moment, James finally understood the magnitude of his miscalculation. While he'd been planning a test of Sarah's love, she'd been quietly weaving their histories together, honoring both where they'd come from and where they were going. His chest felt too tight, his heart too full. The officiant cleared his throat gently. Shall we proceed with the ceremony? Sarah looked at James questioningly, and he nodded, unable to speak. As they turned to face the officiant, he heard her whisper, I love you, old suit and all. And there, before their gathered friends and family, with the Pacific Ocean as their witness, James and Sarah began their journey together, he in his old suit that told the story of where he'd been. She in her gorgeous gown and scuffed ballet flats that proved she'd been paying attention all along. Here's the 1,200-word resolution section. When it came time for the vows, James abandoned his carefully prepared speech. His hands trembling slightly, he pulled a wrinkled piece of paper from his old suit pocket, a receipt from the coffee shop where they'd first met. Sarah, he began, his voice thick with emotion, I came here today with doubts. Not about my love for you, but about whether I truly belonged in your world. I let other people's whispers convince me that I needed to test your love. He paused, swallowing hard. I wore this suit thinking it would reveal your true feelings about who I am and where I come from. Instead, it revealed something about myself, that I was the one still holding on to old insecurities, still letting fear overshadow faith. He looked out at the gathered crowd, then back to Sarah. But you've never seen me as anything less than who I am. While I was planning this misguided test, you were learning to make my mother's dumplings. While I was worrying about fitting into your world, you were literally sewing pieces of my world into your wedding dress. Tears rolled freely down his cheeks now. I'm standing here in an old suit that represents my fears, while you're wearing shoes that represent your hope. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I promise to spend the rest of my life trying to be the man you already believe I am. Sarah reached up and wiped away his tears, her touch infinitely gentle. James, there's nothing to forgive. Those insecurities, those struggles, they're part of who you are, and I love all of you. The boy who helped his parents in their restaurant, the man who built a company from nothing, and yes, even the slightly ridiculous guy who thought wearing an old suit to our wedding would somehow test my love. A ripple of gentle laughter went through the crowd, breaking the tension. Even James managed to smile. Besides, she continued, I think you've given everyone here a masterclass in what really matters. Look around, half the room is crying, and I'm pretty sure Catherine Wells just ruined her designer mascara. The ceremony continued, but something had shifted in the atmosphere. The superficial grandeur of the venue seemed to fade into the background, overshadowed by the raw authenticity of the moment. When they exchanged rings, the simple bands seemed to carry more weight than all the diamonds in the room. At the reception, James's father stood to give a toast, his English careful and measured. In our restaurant, he said, We have saying good soup takes time, love is same way. Must simmer, must develop flavor. Today we see love that has depth, has richness, not fast food love, gourmet love. The celebration that followed was unlike anything either family had expected. Sarah's mother was spotted in the kitchen, learning to fold dumplings from James's mom. His father and her father discovered a shared passion for old kung fu movies. The barriers of class and culture seemed to dissolve with every passing hour. But during their first dance, Sarah leaned close and whispered, "You know what I love most about this day? It's completely, authentically us. No pretense, no performance." James held her tighter, mindful of how close he'd come to letting his fears sabotage everything. "I was so worried about whether I belonged in your world that I forgot something important. We're building our own world, together." Later in the evening, James found himself sitting with Sarah's father, both men watching the dance floor, where Sarah was teaching James's mother the electric slide. "I need to apologize," her father said suddenly. "When Sarah first told me about you, I had concerns. Not about your success, any fool can make money. I worried about your character." He paused, swirling his scotch. "Today showed me everything I needed to know. You were willing to humble yourself, to be vulnerable, all because you wanted the truth. That takes more courage than making $1 million. As the night drew to a close, guests began to leave, many of them stopping to tell the couple how moved they'd been by the day's events. Even Catherine Wells approached, looking somewhat chastened. "I suppose I owe you both an apology," she said. "I've been to hundreds of weddings, but I've never seen love quite like this." Under the stars, with the sound of waves in the background, James and Sarah shared a quiet moment alone. He'd long since removed his tie, and she'd changed into her familiar ballet flats. "You've ruined me, you know," he said, pulling her close. "Oh, how's that?" "I'll never be able to wear a fancy suit again without thinking about this day." She laughed, resting her head on his shoulder. "Good. Let it remind you that love doesn't care about labels or price tags. It cares about morning coffee runs and dumpling-making lessons and all the little moments that make up a life together." James looked at his bride, radiant in her designer gown and scuffed shoes, and finally understood what true wealth looked like. It wasn't about bank accounts or social status. It was about having someone who sees all of you, past, present, and future, and chooses to walk beside you, ballet flats and all. "I love you," he said simply, the words carrying the weight of everything he'd learned that day. "I love you too," she replied, old suit and all. And there, under the California stars, they began their journey together, not as a tech millionaire and a banker's daughter, but as James and Sarah, two people who had discovered that real love transcends all the artificial barriers we build around our hearts. A year had passed, and life had taken on a new rhythm. The struggles and triumphs of the past had shaped them, teaching lessons that no classroom ever could. Through pain, sacrifice, and perseverance, they had discovered their true purpose, one that extended beyond their own dreams. The Black Horizons Foundation stood as a testament to that purpose. What had started as a simple idea, giving back to underprivileged youth, had blossomed into a thriving organization, providing mentorship, scholarships, and resources to those who needed them most. The Foundation's mission was clear: to ensure that no child's potential was wasted due to circumstances beyond their control. Each event, workshop, and scholarship awarded reminded them of where they had once been. They saw themselves in the young faces looking up with hope, hungry for guidance, desperate for opportunity. They had once needed that same hand to pull them up, and now they were the ones reaching out. The past year had taught them the power of resilience, the importance of giving, and the truth that success means little if it isn't shared. Through their journey, they had learned that strength wasn't just about surviving, it was about lifting others along the way. Standing before a crowd at their foundation's anniversary gala, they glanced at the people who had supported them, at the youth whose futures now seemed brighter. This was the legacy they were building, not just in wealth or success, but in the lives they touched. 1 year later, they were no longer just survivors. They were changemakers, mentors, and beacons of hope. The struggles had shaped them, but it was their response to those struggles that defined them. And in that, they had found their true purpose.